I put out this video heavily criticizing the optimization of Monster Hunter Wilds on PC when the game launched. This got a lot of traction, a lot of discussion. I even had Asmongold react to this video. And basically, I just called it an absolute mess, criticizing the overall performance on the CPU, on the GPU, considering that the game looks awful but also runs awful. I didn't mince words. I was upset with everything about this game. The fact that the game developers practically begged you to use frame generation to try to get to 60 FPS. It was a disaster, but they've been continually improving it since launch, and I've been following some of those tests, and we're finally getting a big update here, 1.041, which promises PC-specific optimizations, including reduced CPU-GPU processing and made adjustments to lower the load on the game, added internal levels of detail, LOD, for 3D models, adjusting them to display optimal quality based on the situation to reduce GPU load. Now, I've just got a side note that, like, if they didn't have any sort of LOD system in the game prior to now, like, that's a pretty basic feature most games have. So I'm just like, wait, what? They're just now doing that a year after launch? But okay. All right, better late than never. Optimized monster and endemic life spawn time processing to reduce CPU load. Added effect caching to decrease CPU load when generating duplicate effects. Optimized rendering processes to reduce CPU and GPU load. And performed other minor adjustments to lower the overall load. Now, I've been testing this game over the last several updates, which also had some performance improvements promised, and I've been doing it at a variety of graphic settings, ultra, high, medium, low, and lowest, all on the 5060 Ti 8GB, because another thing I've been tracking is performance on 8GB GPUs, which was pretty disastrous at launch, and you had a lot of missing textures. So this will allow us to measure for improvements on 8GB performance, but also I've been tracking CPU performance on a Ryzen 5 5600X, which is a CPU that, should be able to do a decent performance in most games, considering it's stronger than the CPU that you get in like a PlayStation 5, for example. Now, why don't we start with the CPU testing, because that's a little bit quicker. Now, I also noticed that when they got Title Update 4, they actually had made CPU performance worse for like the first 15 or 20 minutes you run the game. And so what that I'm showing here on the far left is that testing where I had noticed on Title Update 4, CPU performance had gotten dramatically worse. Then in the middle here, I noticed that if I just sat in the same place for 15 minutes, suddenly the CPU burden was less and frame rate improved. One thing I'll tell you with this latest February 18th patch 1.041 is that you don't need to sit there for 15 minutes for it to burn shaders in the background. They went back to having a longer initial shader compilation before you actually get into the game, which I think is an improvement. However, if we measure performance just against the after waiting version of Title Update 4, we also just see some overall performance improvement from there. I'm seeing 65 FPS average by the end of my test section here on the latest patch, as opposed to 59 FPS on the previous version after shaders warmed up. And before you let the shaders warm up, that version was only at 48. But overall, it's a 10% improvement over the previous patch after having warmed up the shaders on it. And the 1% lows are actually showing an even larger improvement, 13% improvement, hitting 52 FPS now over this test section as opposed to 46. Now notice that all of this is better than the launch version of the game. This is just comparing to Title Update 4. Now, the testing that I'm doing here, just to make sure everybody understands it, is yes, I'm using a 9070 XT. I'm using the Monster Hunter Wilds edition of the 9070 XT, by the way, which I got as a review sample from ASRock. Anyway, but it's not really a 9070 XT test. The point of this style of testing to measure CPU testing is you actually just use a powerful GPU that's more powerful than the CPU that you're using, and then you adjust graphic settings in the game like resolution and overall settings and resolution scaling to relieve the burden on the CPU so that the results you're seeing, to relieve the burden on the GPU so that the results you're seeing aren't limited in performance by the GPU. You're not seeing how fast can the GPU run, you're seeing how fast can the CPU run. And that's what we're seeing here, and I'm showing all of the cores. So this is CPU limited performance on the Ryzen 5600X. And again, by running at 1080p medium with FSR performance mode, we're making sure the GPU is not the limiting factor, the CPU is the limiting factor. And like I said, we are now comfortably averaging over 60 FPS here. By the way, the benchmark section I'm using here is not the built-in benchmark for the game, which has not been receiving updates, and I don't think you even download it anymore. So what I'm using here is the first mission of the game, the little secret ride, or however you pronounce the little creatures. I don't actually like or play this game. People just want me to keep testing it out, so I do. Anyway, the ride at the beginning of that first mission is scripted. So if I just don't touch the camera, I can get a identical test run, so we can have like-for-like comparisons as an easy comparison point. It also has multiple NPCs. It goes by some monsters on screen and things like that. So I think it gives a decent test run area for us to compare. So performance on the CPU is better than Title Update 4. And again, I think there had already been some performance improvements since launch, but my launch testing was using their benchmark tool, which I can't compare with anymore for updates because they're not continuing to update it. So now let's go ahead and look at this testing where we are intentionally GPU limited. So now I switched to a 5060 Ti 8GB. Again, partially because this game was very VRAM unoptimized when it first came out. So part of what we're checking for here is they've claimed in some of these updates to have improved VRAM handling. So using an 8GB card is intentional so that we can measure improved performance on cards that were running out of VRAM previously. And I'm using a 9800X3D CPU, which is basically the fastest one you can get. I guess they released 9850X3D now, which is like 3% faster. But anyway, the point is so that the CPU is not limiting the performance. We're using a GPU with a CPU that will not be the limiting factor, so the GPU will be the limiting factor. Now, I ran through a whole bunch of settings, and I'm testing here on the far left is Title Update 3, like the night before they issued the Title Update 4 patch, which I'm testing here. I then tested a January 27th patch, which had promised some improvements, but they weren't necessarily PC specific. But I did notice, while the overall average frame rates didn't improve, and I even saw some regression at some settings, in this test I saw a lot of improvements to the 1% lows, the lowest 1% of frames, kind of the smoothness of the game. How stuttery is it? And then I've got the February 18th patch right here. This is that 1.041 version that promises a lot of PC-specific updates. We're also showing side-by-side footage, so you can track if you're seeing any visual downgrades or anything like that. It's always another thing to take a look at. So what we're seeing here is Title Update 3 averaged 50 FPS, Title Update 4 hit 59, the January 27th update regressed to 57, but now the new update is now at 60 FPS average. So we're finally averaging 60 FPS at 1440p Ultra on the 5060 Ti 8GB. This is not using any resolution scaling. I have upscaling turned off, so the game is just using native TAA. So that's a 20% improvement over Title Update 3. Now, the 1% lows are actually a 24% improvement over Title Update 3, and I've actually gained a further 2 frames per second in the lowest 1%, right, the 1% lows, compared to the January 27th patch, which already had been a significant upgrade over Title Update 4, which was already a significant update over Title Update 3. So what are we testing now? This is now the same run, the beginning of Mission 1, but I've now dropped it to the high preset. So if we're now looking at the high preset on all of these patches. So Title Update 3, 1440p high native TAA on the 5060 Ti 8GB was hitting 53 FPS, and Title Update 4 jumped to 61. The January 27th patch, I saw regression in the averages down to 60, and now our patch on February 18th is hitting 63 FPS, so we have now more than made up for the small regression we saw on the 27th, and overall we're 19% better average frame rate compared to Title Update 3, 63 versus 53, if we want to look at the actual just raw frame rate numbers. Now the 1% lows have seen continual improvement with every single patch. We're seeing 54 in the 1% lows now, compared to 44 back with Title Update 3. The January 27th patch had already seen a big jump up to 53, and Title Update 4 was at 49. So overall, we're 23% better in the 1% lows at 1440p high, and 19% better in the averages at 1440p high, and this is on the 8GB 5060 Ti. Now, the ultra and high settings are settings that struggled on 8GB GPUs at launch. By the way, I'm not using the extra like high resolution texture pack, just to be clear. This was an 8GB card, so I'm not testing out the extra high res optional download. This is just the normal game based download, but at ultra and high settings, where we did see issues with 8GB cards when the game first came out. Now, at 1440p medium settings, we're now seeing 65 FPS average at native TAA on the 5060 Ti. The January's 27th patch was at 64, so we've seen 1 FPS improvement since then, and the Title Update 4 was at 63. That being said, Title Update 3 was only at 57, so every single update since then has improved the performance at 1440p medium on the 5060 Ti 8GB. And the 1% lows have seen a more dramatic improvement. Title Update 3 was at 46, Title Update 4 was at 50, the January 27th patch jumped all the way to 55, and now we've gained another 1 FPS in the 1% lows up to 56. So overall, we're now seeing a 22% improvement in the 1% lows over Title Update 3. And the average frame rates are showing a 14% improvement over Title Update 3 on the medium preset. Now, I know that specific settings in the presets may have been changed slightly, but I do have the side-by-side footage here where I'm not noticing major visual downgrades for these performance improvements. So this really does look like there has been a lot of optimization on the game since launch. So that does kind of beg the question, so why didn't they do this before the game came out? And that's really my thing here, is like, I'm happy to see these improvements, but it's certainly like, okay, would have been nice if it happened before the game came out, if there was a lot of more performance on the table. Now, what we're looking at is 1440p low settings. So the low settings, again, 5060 Ti 8GB, native TAA, 1440p. On Title Update 3, we're at 68 FPS. Title Update 4 boosted it to 72. The January 27th patch jumped all the way to 79. And then now our February 18th patch has jumped up to 82. So this low preset has actually been seeing some pretty incredible gains. We're now 21% faster than Title Update 3, jumping all the way from 68 up to 82. Now, the 1% lows have actually seen an even larger improvement, meaning the 1% lows are a good measurement of like frame time variance, like how bad are the bad frames compared to the good frames, right? Less stuttery. We also have the frame time graphs to look at too. But here we're seeing the 1% lows have improved from Title Update 3 at 55 to Title Update 4 at 56, but then the January 27th patch had a huge improvement to the 1% lows, jumping to 68. But now we've seen the February 18th patch jump all the way up to 70, which is a 27% improvement over Title Update 3 to the 1% lows. In fact, the 1% lows are now 70 when the previous Title Update 3's average frame rate was only 68, meaning now the 1% lows are higher than the previous average on the low preset. Now we're looking at the lowest preset. The lowest preset at native TAA, by the way, the game's presets automatically turn on resolution scaling like DLSS or FSR, so I've been manually disabling that. So it's just using TAA at native resolution, just to be clear. So 1440p lowest preset, but set to native TAA, disabling upscaling, 5060 Ti 8GB again. Title Update 3 was at 68 FPS. Title Update 4 was 72. The January 27th patch jumped all the way to 81. And now the February 18th patch has jumped again pretty significantly up to 86 FPS average. The 1% lows have jumped from 54 with Title Update 3 to 57 with Title Update 4 to January 27th hitting 69, which is nice. And February 18th patch has now jumped up to 73. So look at this, guys. The 1% lows have seen a 35% performance increase since Title Update 3. And the average frame rate has seen a 26% increase since Title Update 3. This is all on the lowest preset. And again, I see the side-by-side footage. There can be some differences in cloud coverage too. So I get that it looks darker on the right now than on the left, but there can be differences in cloud coverage that are just kind of variable between runs. So don't get too hung up on one looking lighter or darker. But I mean, even if there are some visual differences, I'm not noticing such a downgrade or anything like that really means that like this isn't just like really nice to see this improved performance. So what is my overall thoughts? Can we scratch out the unacceptable and say that this is now acceptable? So one of my biggest problems with the game at launch was that when you went down to the lower graphical settings, performance didn't scale very well. Almost all of the performance gains you were getting was off of just resolution scaling. But if you didn't use resolution scaling, there wasn't a lot of performance to be gained, and the game would just look really bad and still perform bad. So that was one of my issues with the game at launch. Also, just I didn't think that the game's visuals matched the kind of performance that you're getting. In other words, other similar games looked a lot better for the same performance or looked similar with much better performance. This game just seemed like an outlier as far as how demanding it was for the kinds of visuals that you were getting. So where are we at now? Well, as you can see, the CPU performance has definitely improved. The GPU performance has definitely improved, and especially on the lowest presets, there's now significantly more scaling available to reach high frame rates than there used to be on lower graphics cards. And especially 8GB cards now perform a lot better in this game, which is definitely what we're seeing backed up by my testing in this video. So I still don't think that Monster Hunter Wilds is a shining beacon of optimization. But I think if the game had launched at the performance levels that it's at currently, I would not have had to make such a dramatic video about it being completely unacceptable, the optimization being awful, and just really calling this out. Because while I test a lot of games, and I often give some thoughts on, if they're a little more demanding than they probably should be visually, I really don't usually make a big video just calling out one specific game as just the opposite of a shining beacon of optimization here. And for those people who were critical of my claims in that, I've got to just say that the fact that we're basically seeing the same visuals now, but performing significantly better, is backing up my claim here that the game wasn't optimized. It is now more optimized. There's probably still room for more optimization. I don't know if we'll get it. But the point is, there were very much real optimizations to the game code that could be made to significantly improve the performance. And they have now made some of those optimizations to the code, and I'm glad that they have. It's about a year later than it should have been, though. Games should launch in an acceptable performance state. If they don't have acceptable performance, they shouldn't launch yet. That's my opinion. I understand investors in the game may feel differently, but considering how fast the game dropped off, it sold like crazy, especially well on PC. But I noticed the player base died off quickly. Now, part of that's the game itself. I think that a lot of people just didn't find it challenging enough. Now, I just don't like the game anyway, so I'm not a good person to ask about that. But I think a lot of people, had the reaction to the gameplay itself. But I don't think that the game looking bad and running bad really helped the situation. So I don't know about the investor side of things and whether it would have been worth delaying the game for some more optimization. But from my end, I would certainly say the game wasn't optimized, and the fact that they've been able to pull this much more performance out of it while looking pretty much the same just proves that that was the case. It's certainly in a much more acceptable place now than it was before. So if you've been hesitant to jump in, I would say that it's in a much less offensive state now than it ever has been, even if it still isn't perfect or a shining beacon of optimization. Also, for people who care about the actual gameplay, they've been doing a lot of updates to that too. I'm not really the person to ask about that, but I get the general impression that the gameplay has improved quite a bit as well. Anyway, hopefully you guys found this video useful and or interesting. Maybe this will be my last Monster Hunter Wilds optimization update video, because it's in at least somewhat reasonable state now, I think. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section. I'm sure it still has issues. All I have is this one little benchmark section that I'm doing to compare, so I'm sure other areas of the game probably still have issues or perform differently. So yeah, always good to get your comments in the comment section. Hope all of you have an excellent day.